Welcome to Blackman Folktales. Please kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. It means the whole world to us. Also comment, "My best friend snatched my husband."
Amara often thought of her life as a painting framed in gold, carefully brushed with love, stability, and friendship. She was a Nigerian young woman whose world seemed secure, wrapped in the arms of her husband Chike, and balanced by the constant presence of her best friend Ifunanya. To many, she was lucky. She had a husband who adored her, children who lit up her days with laughter, and a friend who stood by her like a second soul. Every morning, Amara would rise to the sound of Chike's gentle humming as he prepared for work, the smell of fresh pap and akra filling the house, often cooked by Ifunanya, who had become such a fixture in their home that even the children sometimes asked if she lived with them. Ifunanya was always there, her laughter ringing through the rooms, her hands busy helping with chores, her voice soothing the children when Amara was tired. To outsiders, it was the kind of friendship people envied, two women who shared history, secrets, and dreams. They had met in secondary school, bonding over notebooks and whispered secrets during prep time, vowing that nothing, not distance, not men, not life, would ever come between them. That promise had carried them into adulthood. Ifunanya had stood by Amara on her wedding day, adjusting her veil with tears in her eyes, whispering prayers of blessing over her marriage. When Amara gave birth to her first child, Ifunanya was there, cradling the baby as if she were blood. Their bond seemed sacred, the kind of friendship that mothers want their daughters to treasure because it was rare. And Amara did treasure it, perhaps too much, perhaps blindly. To her, Ifunanya was not just a friend, she was a sister, the family her heart had chosen. But perfection, as Amara would later learn, has a way of hiding cracks. At first, they were so faint, so harmless, she dismissed them without thought. She noticed, once, the way Chike's eyes lingered a second too long when Ifunanya walked into the room in a fitted gown, laughter spilling from her lips. It wasn't a look filled with guilt or desire, at least not one that Amara could easily accuse. It was subtle, masked beneath layers of casual familiarity. Yet something about it struck her, a flicker that lit and died so quickly she convinced herself she had imagined it. After all, wasn't Ifunanya like a sister to her husband as well? How could she suspect anything when her friend spent hours helping with homework, folding laundry, and even cooking Chike's favorite meals when Amara was too exhausted to manage? Ifunanya's presence was a blessing, or so Amara thought. She never asked why her friend preferred spending time in her home rather than her own. She never questioned why Chike seemed less irritated by Ifunanya's chatter than by her own occasional complaints. She never let herself dwell on the fleeting moments, the sudden silence when she entered the room, the way conversations shifted as though she wasn't meant to hear them, or the occasional joke Chike shared with Ifunanya that made them both laugh in a way that excluded her. Amara's heart was soft, trusting, unwilling to believe in shadows where she thought only light existed. In her mind, suspicion was a betrayal of its own. To doubt either Chike or Ifunanya would be to insult the love she believed they both carried for her. So, she buried the unease, told herself friendship and family often bloodlines of closeness, and chose instead to see her world as whole. But cracks, no matter how carefully ignored, always grow. On Sundays, after church, the picture of perfection came alive most vividly. Neighbors admired the trio, Amara radiant in her Ankara dress, Chike proud with his arm around her waist, and Ifunanya trailing beside them, carrying the children's bags and laughing as though she belonged to them. People would whisper words of admiration, or, "See friendship goals," or, "Chike is blessed," or, "to have not only a good wife but also her loyal friend." These comments filled Amara's chest with pride, not knowing they also fed the secret seed of envy in Ifunanya's heart. Amara believed Ifunanya's presence validated her happiness, made it richer, fuller. She often thanked God for giving her a husband who loved her and a friend who supported her so deeply. But beneath the hymns and laughter, something darker brewed. Amara did not notice how Ifunanya's gaze lingered on Chike when he laughed, how her smile tightened whenever Amara and Chike shared tender gestures. She did not notice how Ifunanya had started echoing her words, wearing styles similar to hers, and subtly inserting herself into every intimate circle of her life. To Amara, this was sisterhood. To Ifunanya, it was rehearsal, practice for a role she had long coveted. And Chike, though he still played the dutiful husband, was not immune to the small temptations that proximity offered. He enjoyed the admiration in Ifunanya's eyes, the ease of her attention, the way she made him feel seen when Amara was too tired or distracted with the children. Amara's perfect picture was admired by all, but what she did not know was that the frame had already begun to splinter. The very two people she trusted most were not just holding brushes in her painting, they were slowly repainting her life behind her back. Amara's home had always been a place of warmth, filled with the laughter of her children and the easy rhythm of family life. But lately, something felt different, like a faint but persistent chill that she couldn't quite explain. It began with Chike's late-night phone calls. At first, she dismissed them as work-related. After all, Chike was a hardworking man with a small but growing business, and he often needed to coordinate with clients. But the way he silenced his phone whenever she entered the room, the hurried manner in which he ended conversations, left her unsettled. One night, she stirred awake and found him sitting at the edge of the bed, whispering into the phone, his face partially illuminated by the glow of the screen. She asked who it was, and he quickly muttered a business call before sliding back into bed, kissing her forehead as though to erase her doubts. Amara wanted to believe him. She told herself marriages thrived on trust, and trust meant not questioning every little thing. Yet, the unease remained, sitting heavy in her chest. Around the same time, she began to notice how Ifunanya seemed unusually present when Chike was home. If he came back early from work, Ifunanya would somehow just stop by to drop something off, or she would insist on helping him with small tasks around the house. Once, Amara walked into the kitchen to find Ifunanya laughing at one of Chike's jokes, her hand lightly brushing his arm. The sight unsettled her, but she shook it off. "They're just comfortable," she whispered to herself. "It's nothing." But her instincts stirred with questions she refused to voice, fearing the answers might shatter her peace. It wasn't only the late-night calls that gnawed at her peace. Amara began to notice small, almost insignificant changes in Chike's behavior. He had always been attentive, but recently his mind seemed elsewhere. When she spoke, his responses were absent-minded, as though his body was in the room but his thoughts were miles away. On evenings when she tried to plan family dinners, he often claimed exhaustion or sudden work commitments, leaving her to share meals with the children and, more often than not, with Ifunanya. In the past, Amara had loved how comfortable her friend felt in her home, how she seamlessly blended into the family's routines. But now, she felt something uneasy stir when Ifunanya stayed late into the night, laughing with Chike while Amara struggled to keep her eyes open. There were moments, fleeting yet sharp, that made her heart skip, the way Ifunanya's eyes glistened when Chike praised her cooking, the way Chike seemed less irritated with Ifunanya's long stories than with Amara's own occasional nagging. Still, Amara told herself not to read too much into it. Marriage was not always perfect, friendships too had their complexities. She was certain she was only overthinking, creating storms where none existed. And yet, her subconscious knew better. Later at night, when she lay awake listening to the silence of the house, the unease turned into restless thoughts. What if there was more to the way Chike and Ifunanya interacted? What if she was being blind? Still, each morning she rose with a smile, pushed down her doubts, and reminded herself that love and trust meant letting go of suspicion. The first undeniable crack appeared one evening when Amara returned home unexpectedly early from a women's fellowship meeting at church. She had left her phone behind and decided to cut her evening short, eager to see her family. As she entered the house, she heard low voices in the living room. Peeking in, she saw Chike and Ifunanya seated closely, their heads bent together over his phone, laughter bubbling between them like an intimate secret. When they noticed her, they startled, quickly pulling apart. Chike muttered something about showing Ifunanya a funny video, while Ifunanya smiled too brightly, her laughter suddenly forced. Amara stood there, frozen between relief and suspicion. She wanted to believe them, but the image of their closeness burned in her mind long after Ifunanya had left. That night, as she lay beside Chike, she felt a strange distance between them. His arm around her waist was familiar, but it no longer carried the same reassurance. In her heart, questions clawed for answers. Was she imagining things? Or was her perfect world slowly unraveling? Amara told herself she needed to trust, to preserve her home and her peace. But deep inside, she knew trust had already begun to crack, and once it cracked, it could never truly return to what it once was. The weeks that followed were filled with moments that tugged at Amara's sanity. She tried to focus on her children, on her work, on her faith, but the unease continued to gnaw at her heart. One afternoon, while tidying the car after Chike returned from a business trip, she found something that made her blood run cold, a single gold earring tucked into the corner of the passenger seat. It wasn't hers. Amara didn't wear that style, and she instantly recognized the design. It was Ifunanya's. Her hands trembled as she held it, her mind spinning with possibilities. She wanted to believe it was innocent, that perhaps Ifunanya had simply borrowed the car for an errand. But when had that happened? She couldn't remember. Her mind swirled with unease. She slipped the earring into her pocket and said nothing, not even to Chike. That night, as she watched him laugh with the children, she wondered how much of the man she loved was still hers. Her silence wasn't cowardice, it was fear. Fear of what truth might come spilling out if she asked the wrong question. Fear that the life she had built, the love she had cherished, might already be tainted beyond repair. Her fears deepened when she noticed how Chike handled his phone. He was never careless with it before, but now it seemed like an extension of his hand. He carried it everywhere, even to the bathroom. Whenever it vibrated, he would glance at the screen before slipping it back into his pocket, often leaving the room to take calls. Amara told herself it was business stress, but her instincts whispered otherwise. The most painful part was that she couldn't bring herself to confront him directly. She was torn between suspicion and loyalty, fear and denial. In her desperation, she turned to Ifunanya, pouring out her worries late one night while they sat together in the kitchen. Ifunanya listened intently, her face etched with concern, nodding as though she shared Amara's pain. "Amara, you worry too much," she said softly. "Chike loves you. Don't let little things create problems in your marriage. Men are like that sometimes, secretive about work matters. Don't read too much into it." Her words, spoken with such conviction, eased Amara's heart for a while. She wanted to believe her friend, to cling to the comfort of her assurance. But something inside her knew that Ifunanya's comfort was too smooth, too perfect, like a rehearsed line in a play. The following weekend, Amara decided to test her instincts. She suggested a family outing, something she and Chike hadn't done in a long while. He agreed reluctantly, and they spent the day at a nearby park. For a few hours, it felt like old times. Chike laughed with the children, held Amara's hand, and even kissed her cheek in public. Her heart soared, almost convincing her that everything was fine. But later that night, as she folded laundry, Chike's phone buzzed on the dresser. She glanced at it instinctively and froze. The message preview glowed on the screen. "I can't wait to see you again. Tonight was perfect." Her breath caught, her hands trembling so violently that she almost dropped the clothes in her hand. The message wasn't signed, but she knew. She didn't need a name to confirm what her heart already feared. Amara sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone as tears welled in her eyes. She wanted to scream, to confront him, but fear held her back. Fear of the storm that would erupt once words left her lips. That night, lying beside her husband, she stared into the darkness, her mind heavy with shadows. For the first time in her life, she wondered if both her husband and her best friend were nothing but strangers wearing masks. Amara's world tilted the next morning. The message replayed in her mind like a haunting echo, each word slicing through her chest. She tried to act normal, cooking breakfast, smiling at the children, but inside she was breaking. When Chike kissed her cheek on his way to work, she almost flinched, her stomach twisting with nausea. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but she feared what he might say. And so she chose silence, though silence weighed heavier than words. Later that day, unable to contain her turmoil, she confided again in Ifunanya. With trembling hands, she described the message she had seen. Ifunanya gasped in perfect imitation of shock, clutching Amara's hands as if sharing her pain. "Amara, you mustn't jump to conclusions," she insisted. "There are many women who throw themselves at married men. It doesn't mean Chike is guilty. Please, don't accuse him without proof. Don't let the devil use small things to destroy your marriage." Her words, soft and persuasive, sank into Amara's fragile heart. She clung to them like a drowning woman clings to driftwood, convincing herself that her best friend had her best interest at heart. What she did not see, what she could not imagine, was the flicker of triumph hidden in Ifunanya's eyes, quickly masked behind concern. That evening, Amara finally summoned the courage to speak to Chike. She chose her words carefully, not wanting to sound accusatory. "Chike, is there something you want to tell me?" she asked softly as they sat in the living room. His brow furrowed, and he turned to her with an expression of irritation. "What are you talking about, Amara?" he snapped. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she mentioned the text message. For a moment, his face hardened, but then he laughed, dismissing her fears. "So now you're snooping through my phone. Amara, do you want to destroy this marriage with your insecurities? You know I work late, I have female clients, what do you expect? That they will not message me? You're imagining things." His tone was sharp, cutting her deeper than the words themselves. Amara felt small, foolish, and guilty, as though she had wronged him by doubting. Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded, whispering an apology. That night, as she lay in bed beside him, she felt lonelier than ever. Chike had turned her suspicion into weakness, twisting the truth until she doubted her own mind. And Ifunanya, her trusted friend, had reinforced that doubt. For the first time, Amara wondered if she was truly losing her grip on reality. Paragraph 3 is almost equal to 500 plus words. But reality, no matter how deeply hidden, always finds its way to the surface. A few days later, while dropping the children off at her mother's house, Amara returned home earlier than expected. As she stepped into the compound, her heart froze. Chike's car was parked outside. She hadn't known he was home. Curious and anxious, she quietly let herself in. What she saw in the living room shattered every illusion she had desperately clung to. Chike and Ifunanya sat on the couch, their hands entwined, their faces close, locked in a moment so intimate it could never be explained away as friendship. Amara's gasp made them jerk apart, but the damage was done. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating, as her world crumbled before her eyes. Chike stammered. Ifunanya stood frozen, her expression unreadable. Amara's heart raced, her chest tightening as if it might burst. Everything she had refused to see, everything she had silenced in her mind, was now laid bare. The betrayal wasn't imagined, it wasn't paranoia, it was real, and it was standing in her living room, wrapped in the bodies of the two people she trusted most. Amara's breath hitched as silence pressed down on the living room. The sight of Chike and Ifunanya's entwined hands burned in her eyes, an image she wished she could scrub from her memory. Her voice trembled as she finally asked, "Why?" Chike stuttered, his lips parting and closing again like a man caught in a trap, but it was Ifunanya who spoke first. Slowly, she straightened, her usual mask of gentleness cracking to reveal something colder. "Amara, don't act surprised," she said, her tone eerily calm, almost rehearsed. "Did you really think you could have it all forever? A perfect husband, a perfect family, a perfect life. You don't even see it, do you? You take everything for granted." Amara blinked, her heart pounding. She struggled to comprehend what her best friend was saying. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. Ifunanya's eyes hardened. "I have always been the shadow in your life. The one who watches you shine while I remain in the background. I've envied you, Amara. Your home. Your children. Your husband. Everything I ever wanted, you got. I was the one who picked you up when you fell, who stood by you when no one else did, and yet you lived the life I could only dream of. Why should you get it all?" Her words pierced like a knife, slicing through the last fragile threads of their friendship. The woman Amara had once called her sister now stood before her, unashamed, even proud of her betrayal. Chike tried to intervene, running a hand down his face as if the weight of the moment was too much. "Ifunanya, stop. Don't," but she silenced him with a sharp look before turning back to Amara. "You want the truth? Fine. Chike and I love each other. We didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. And honestly, it was inevitable. You were too busy being the perfect wife, the perfect mother, too distracted to notice when your husband needed more." Amara's chest tightened, her knees threatening to buckle. "Needed more," she whispered. "And you thought you were the one to give it to him?" Her voice rose, trembling with anger and pain. Chike finally spoke, his voice low. "Amara, please, I didn't mean for any of this. I still love you. You're my wife. This just happened." Amara turned to him, her eyes blazing with hurt. "Just happened? You don't just happen into betraying your wife with her best friend. You made choices, Chike. Choices that destroyed everything we built." Her voice cracked as tears spilled down her face, but there was still in her tone now. Ifunanya smirked, an expression that made Amara's stomach churn. "Maybe it's time you faced reality. Chike isn't yours alone anymore. You may have had him first, but I will have him last." Her audacity left the room trembling with tension. For the first time in their decades of friendship, Amara saw Ifunanya not as a sister, not even as a rival, but as a thief who had been plotting in plain sight. Amara's pain shifted into something else, an awakening. She looked at them both, her eyes red but steady. "You think you've won," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You think by stealing my husband, you've taken my life. No, Ifunanya. What you've stolen is your own soul. You betrayed the one person who trusted you more than anyone else in this world, and you did it with no shame." She turned to Chike, her heart breaking as she whispered, "And you've thrown away a love that was pure, a marriage that was sacred, for something that will never last. I see you both now. clearly. With those words, she walked past them, each step heavy yet purposeful. The tears fell freely, but behind them burned a fire she had never felt before. As she shut herself in her room, the echoes of Ifunanya's smug expression and Chike's guilty silence haunted her. Yet beneath the pain, a seed of resolve began to take root. Amara realized she could no longer cling to illusions. The mask had come off, and now the only path left was to rise from the ruins they had left behind. The days after the confrontation were some of the darkest of Amara's life. She moved through her home like a ghost, her smile forced for the children's sake, her laughter absent. At night, she cried silently into her pillow, her body trembling with the weight of betrayal. Every corner of her house felt tainted, every memory poisoned by the knowledge that Ifunanya had sat on her couch, cooked in her kitchen, laughed with her children, all while plotting to steal the life she had built. For a while, Amara thought she might lose herself completely. But then something shifted. One morning, as she looked at her children's innocent faces, she realized she could not afford to collapse. Their lives depended on her strength, and she refused to let them grow up seeing their mother broken. Slowly, she began to reclaim herself. She stopped waiting for Chike's explanations or apologies. She stopped answering Ifunanya's calls. Instead, she poured herself into prayer, into journaling her pain, into small acts of self-care she had long neglected. The more she focused on herself and her children, the more she felt a quiet strength growing within her. Chike, sensing the distance growing between them, tried to mend the cracks, but his efforts felt hollow. He would buy Amara small gifts, linger at her side, attempt to hold her hand. But every touch reminded her of his betrayal, every gift felt like a bandage on a wound that ran too deep. Ifunanya, on the other hand, continued her charade, sending messages filled with fake remorse, claiming she had made a mistake, that she missed their friendship. Amara ignored them all. She had no intention of going back to the woman who had stabbed her in the back with such precision. Her silence became her shield, and it infuriated Ifunanya, who thrived on attention. Slowly, Amara began to see her pain transform into something else, clarity. She realized that while betrayal had broken her trust, it had also forced her to rediscover her own worth. She was more than a wife, more than a friend. She was a woman of strength, capable of rising even when the world tried to bury her. With time, Amara began to rebuild her life piece by piece. She took on projects she had long set aside, reconnected with old friends she had neglected, and leaned into her mother's wisdom and prayers. She found solace in small victories, cooking a new recipe that her children loved, waking up early to exercise, even laughing again with colleagues at work. The woman who once doubted herself now stood taller, her confidence rekindled by the fire of her suffering. The betrayal had scarred her, yes, but it had also awakened her to her own resilience. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw not the broken wife or the betrayed friend, but a woman who had survived the storm and was still standing. Ifunanya and Chike had taken her trust, but they could not take her spirit. And that realization gave her a power she never thought she had. Confrontation came weeks later, when Ifunanya appeared at Amara's doorstep uninvited. Dressed elegantly, her eyes sharp, she carried herself with the arrogance of someone who believed she had won. "Amara," she said smoothly, "we need to talk. I know you're angry, but one day you'll understand. Chike and this is real. It's not just an affair. He loves me. You'll see it's better if you let go." Amara stood in the doorway, her children playing in the background, her heart steady. The old Amara might have broken down, pleaded, begged for answers. But this Amara, reborn from the ashes, simply smiled. "Ifunanya," she said calmly, "you can have Chike. If he chose you, then he was never truly mine to begin with. But understand this, what you stole from me wasn't my husband, it was my trust. And that is something you will never get back. One day, you realize that a love built on betrayal can never last. It will destroy you from within. Her words cut deeper than any anger could, leaving Ifunanya speechless. Chike, too, tried to salvage what remained of their marriage. One evening, he knelt before Amara, tears streaming down his face. "I made a mistake," he whispered. "Please, forgive me. Don't let this end us." Amara looked at him, her heart heavy but clear. "You didn't just make a mistake, Chike. You made a choice, over and over again. You chose lies over truth. You chose her over me. And in doing so, you lost me." She helped him to his feet, her touch gentle but firm. "I won't live my life chained to betrayal. I deserve more, and so do our children. You will always be their father, but you can no longer be my husband." Her words sealed the final chapter of their marriage, not with bitterness, but with strength. Chike wept, realizing too late that he had lost the woman who had given him everything. Amara's journey did not end in heartbreak, it ended in rebirth. With time, she built a new life defined not by what she had lost but by what she had discovered within herself. She became more present for her children, more intentional about her dreams, and more protective of her heart. Friends and family admired her resilience, calling her an inspiration. Those scars of betrayal remained, they no longer defined her, they reminded her of how far she had come. Ifunanya and Chike faded into the background, trapped in the consequences of their choices, while Amara stepped into a future filled with hope and strength. She learned that sometimes, the greatest victory isn't revenge or holding on, it's the courage to let go and walk forward, unbroken. Standing at the threshold of her new life, Amara finally understood, betrayal had not destroyed her. It had transformed her into the woman she was always meant to be. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.